This is Tim.
This is Austin.
And this is Deconstructing Comics.
Thank you, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. William Shakespeare. Playwright, poet, actor, philosopher. A man whose creative and literary genius has had an immeasurably profound influence upon the consciousness and culture of the entire English-speaking world. And yet, how much do we really know? I mean, how much do we really appreciate the tremendous body of work contained in this single volume? Well, not enough is the answer, and I believe I can illustrate this by conducting a brief poll amongst the audience. Bob, can I get some house lights on, please? Oh, yes. Now, you're a theater-going crowd, no doubt of above-average cultural and literary awareness, and yet, if I could just have a brief show of hands, how many of you have ever seen or read any play by William Shakespeare? Any play at all by the bard? Just raise your hand. It doesn't matter which... We better get out of here. They don't know. They all know more than we do.
They do not know.
Let's just start running now. Let's just...
Austin, they don't know Shakespeare from Tichenor. Just keep going. Narrow it down.
See if we can narrow it down a bit, shall we? How many of you have ever seen or read All's Well That Ends Well? All's Well, anyone? Yeah, so that seems to be separating the wheat from the chaff rather nicely. Let's see if we can find out who the true Shakespeare trivia champs are here tonight. How many of you have ever seen or read King John? King John? Oh, yeah, right.
Welcome to Deconstructing Comics, sponsored by ComicsNow.com. Today I am on Skype with Austin Tichenor from the Reduced Shakespeare Company, and you're in Miami?
I am. I'm in Miami for the next several weeks. We're performing our the show that started it all for us, The Complete Works of William Shakespeare Abridged.
Yeah, I was really glad to hear that you were doing that again, because I'd been listening to your podcast, and it seemed like you hadn't been doing that very much recently.
We hadn't. The Shakespeare show was written by the original founding members of the Reduced Shakespeare Company, Daniel Singer, Adam Long, and Jess Winfield, and they had taken, and the authors own the rights to the scripts. The Reduced Shakespeare Company doesn't own the rights to the scripts. So they had taken their script and they had done an off-Broadway run, and they had gone other places with it. And in the meantime, the Reduced Shakespeare Company had focused on our other reductions, the Complete History of America Abridged, the Bible, the Complete Word of God Abridged, the Complete Millennium Musical Abridged, 1,000 years of world history in 100 minutes, and just to make it more difficult, we sang and danced. And then all the great books abridged, and then our most recent show, Completely Hollywood, abridged.
Mm-hmm. And as shocking as it may sound, I think some of our listeners may actually not have heard of you. So can you explain a little bit about what is an RSC show, actually? What happens if you go to one of these?
Well, first of all, I am shocked. But second of all, basically the Reduced Shakespeare Company is a three-man comedy group that takes long, serious topics and reduces them down to short, silly comedies. And our first show was The Complete Works of William Shakespeare Abridged, which came out of a busking act at Renaissance fairs in Northern California. This is where people get together and in a big field somewhere and dress and drink and speak and otherwise act as if it's Elizabethan England. It was Daniel Singer's idea, the founder of the company, to call for him and a couple of other people to call themselves a Reduced Shakespeare Company and to do a short version of Hamlet. And so that's what they did. And really, it was a pass the hat act. And from there, they reduced Romeo and Juliet. And then they went, this is great. We've reduced two of Shakespeare's plays. There are only 35 more. How tough could that be? Let's do a show called The Complete Works of William Shakespeare Abridged, all of his plays. And they did that in 1987 and took it to the Edinburgh Festival in Scotland. And from there, we became a sort of a reduced international sensation. We started going to theater festivals and fringe comedy festivals all over the world. But the original founding members began to drop off and spontaneously combust as they realized, holy moly, this is becoming a full-time job, and none of us ever signed up for that. And so both Daniel and Jess left to be replaced by my current partner, Reed Martin, in 1989, and then myself in 1992. And so Reed and I are the co-owners of the company now, and we write all the subsequent scripts. Two of them, along with the former founding member Adam Long. Reed and I call ourselves the new founding members, and so we still continue to tour all over the world, and it's a great gig, and we've branched onto the internet, as maybe some of your listeners now know, because we have our weekly podcast that we do, the Reduced Shakespeare Company podcast, now in its third year.
Yeah.
And that's getting a really good response. We're getting over 20,000 unique downloads every month of people listening to all of the over 100 podcasts that we have.
Mm-hmm. And I'm finally caught up now.
Are you? Congratulations!
I just discovered it in July, and I listened to every single one of them, and I got caught up in reduced time. So.
Yeah, and now you've never seen us. You only heard us orally,
right?
Audio.
Until last night when I watched complete works on YouTube, but although kind of out of order.
Right, I'm sure.
Yeah, that was the first that I'd seen you. Before I just heard your BBC complete works of Shakespeare radio show from what is that, about 92, 93?
That's about 94, 95, somewhere around there. Yeah,
there's some references to the Clinton administration, so.
No, ladies and gentlemen, you laugh, you scoff, but let he or she among you who is free from sin live in a glass house. For I submit to you that our society's collective capacity to comprehend, much less attain, the genius of William Shakespeare has been systematically compromised by computers, vandalized by video games, and annihilated by Andrew Lloyd Webber. But have no fear. The Reduced Shakespeare Company is here. We descend among you on a mission from God and the literary muse to spread the holy word of the bard to the masses. Amen. To help you take those first faltering steps out of the 20th century quagmire of fresh frozen fast food culture and into the future, a glorious future, a future in which this book will be found in every hotel room in the world. That is my dream. Yes, thank you.
So it occurred to me that comics and live theater have some connections and may have more than we might think. So I wanted to see, you said that you had read comics a lot, I mean, at least when you were younger. What did you read?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, since you started asking these questions, I've really had to start thinking about all of that, because I haven't really thought about it consciously at all, really. But I think there are a lot of similarities between comics and theater, and maybe that my love of it has affected my reason to go into theater. When I was young, it was just I started with the classics, Peanuts, and then from there I moved on to the I guess you'd call them the graphic novels of Tintin and Asterisk, which were I mean the not only the humor of both of them, but the kind of serious adventure, the earnest adventure of Tintin was, I think, still and the bad puns of Asterix. I think both of those are still strong influences. And then when I got a little bit older, I was more of a DC guy than a Marvel guy. I was into the classics of your Batmans, your Supermans, your Justice Leagues, and at that time, this was in early 70s, I guess now. It was talk about earnest. Oh my gosh, every DC comic book hero was fighting the social injustices of the day, poverty and racism and whatever, So Green Arrow and Green Lantern are helping, poor underprivileged black children, and now Green Lantern is African American, and I think we've come full circle. And so but the art of Neil Adams and those guys was just so powerful for me. But then I was also a big fan of the over the top EC comics and Mad Magazine, of course, the humor and the satire of Mad Magazine. And I guess that all came together sort of in my love for the comic book Swamp Thing in the 70s, which was very, very important to me. I guess on the Marvel side, I was into the Sergeant Furies, the war comics, the pimply, angst-ridden superheroes of the Marvel universe didn't kind of didn't mean much to me.
Well, you mentioned Swamp Thing. Do you remember who was working on that book then?
Yeah, it was the original. It was Bernie Wrightson, and I mean Bernie Wrightson is just for a period there I was buying every book that Bernie illustrated. They came out with classic editions of Frankenstein and Dracula, and he would illustrate them. And I found that that's still true. In my grown up life now, I'm really drawn to, no pun intended, genre of films generally. Be they science fiction or be they horror, or my favorite is the horror comedy. I mean, we do our show completely Hollywood abridged, and there's a section in the show where we interact with the audience and we talk about. I ask the audience what their favorite movies are, and as it happens, I have a fairly encyclopedic knowledge of movies and actors in movies, and so usually, unless it's I guess, and now I'm talking about mostly about movies in English, both England produced and American produced. I pretty much have heard of it, so I can talk reasonably intelligently. But they ask me what my favorite movie is. When they ask me what my favorite movie is, I have to say, in the last couple of years, my favorite movie is Shaun of the Dead. Which is totally a comic book movie come to life. And I tell my friends, particularly my women friends, I say, do you like chick flicks? Did you like Notting Hill? If you like Notting Hill but thought it needed zombies, that's Shaun of the Dead.
Okay. So you mentioned like the puns and asterisks or whatever had influenced you, I suppose mainly as a writer of plays, a writer of stage content. Have comics affected you at all as an actor?
Yeah, they have, because they have. I mean, the puns of asterisk were really funny because not only were the pictures funny, but the text was funny. And that was always that. Sometimes those things work in parallel, and sometimes they work in opposition. And for different effect, and that's become true for my playwriting as well. The dialogue that the actors are saying is often completely in opposition to the subtext that they're feeling, or even to the behavior that they're enacting on stage. So, in terms of even before, it seems like a comic book is like a movie on a page. It's a movie in two dimensions. You see behavior, you see action, you see color, you see dialogue, all of those things working together. And I think that's what got me into theater generally. I mean, I think maybe not what it got me into, but I mean, my love of comics is related to my love of theater, because I think it's because theater is where in the performing arts, theater is where all of the different elements of theater and all the different strengths come into play. Movement and acting and comedy and pacing. That was the other thing about different comic books had different pacing. Like the Peanuts, the Peanut comic strips. Just the daily four panel strip. You have it's like a joke. You have a setup, the development, then you have a beat, and then the final phrase is the punchline. And I'm a big fan currently. The thing I read every day now, continue to read, is Doonesbury, and it's the same thing. And often, what I love about Doonesbury is that the punchline often comes in the third panel, and that the fourth panel is a kind of an agreement to or some sort of comment on. It's like an additional joke, and I found that's totally true in not only my own personal comedy, but some of the Reduced Shakespeare Company comedy as well. Is that we don't say the punchline and stand there and go, ba-boom, hello. Mm-hmm. There's the punchline. It's a part of a rhythm thing. You say the punchline and keep going, mm-hmm. and it's often the and keep going part that prompts the laugh. Certainly, and certainly in my head, mm-hmm. that's how it works.
Well, I've noticed too in Dilbert sometimes it has more than one punchline.
Yeah, right. Yes, it's like 3 panels.
Sometimes the funniest thing is in the first panel.
Yes, the setup. Yes, the funniest thing is in the first panel, and then it just keeps getting increasingly absurd as people try to deal with the absurdity of the premise initiated in the first panel. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. I'm struggling here. So as I was thinking about preparing for this podcast, I was thinking there have been a lot of comics that have been adapted to the stage, going back like 100 years to Little Nemo,
right.
Little Abner, Annie, Charlie Brown,
right.
And just a few months ago, I talked to Shannon Wheeler, who created Too Much Coffee Man, and that had been adapted to be an opera. It's being performed in some places.
Interesting.
In adapting a comic to the stage, I wonder how well that works, and what inherent problems there might be in that.
Well, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think the stage has to follow. Characters, and and all the things that you cited. I think they're all iconic characters with a storyline, like Annie particularly. But Lil Abner was hugely popular, and I think that show was hugely popular. Mm-hmm. They tried to do a Superman musical in the '60s called "It's a Bird, It's a Plane, It's Superman," and I'm not sure that went very well.
The famous ones are all ones that came from the newspaper, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. I wonder what that is. I think it's something about the serialized nature, probably, of the storytelling. It lends itself to that kind of.
And they're really the most mainstream comics. They're much more mainstream than superhero comics, really. Most people are aware of them.
Yeah, they're about people. They're about people rather than superhuman beings. Mm-hmm. It's funny, and yet there are successful musicals that I think took some of their energy from the comic strips. I'm thinking like Guys and Dolls. Those were taken from Damon Runyon short stories, but the whole opening number and even some of the costuming was kind of stylized and heightened in a kind of a storybook way, I guess, and maybe that was drawn from the comics, and maybe not. But also in Bye Bye Birdie, there was the famous number, the telephone hour, where all the teenagers of whatever the town is are all talking on the phone at the same time, and they're in a wall of cubes. They're all in their own little cubes. It looks, when you looked at it, it looked exactly like a Sunday comic strip. 6 or 8 stories, 6 or 8 cubes high, and 2 or 3 cubes across. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's funny. I think that has sort of entered in, and I was thinking about it too. That some of the contemporary musicals. This is my other thing for my work as a Reduced Shakespeare Company guy. We're playwrights, and although we did a musical. And for us, it was reduced. It wasn't. It didn't feel like a Reduced Shakespeare Company show. It didn't. Reduced Shakespeare Company shows need to feel as if they're sort of a fly-by-night operation, or they're still a pass the hat act, basically. Mm-hmm. And if we had written a musical sort of that was guitar based, we maybe could have pulled that off, but we didn't. We wrote it that was sort of keyboard based, and it was heavily arranged well. Mm-hmm. But if we were to do a musical again, a Reduced Shakespeare Company musical again, I would do it differently. But that doesn't feel right. But I'm a big fan of the musicals. I'm a big fan of musical theater, because again, it brings all those elements into play. And I'm thinking that some of my favorite musicals of recent years have that energy that I associate with comics. Little Shop of Horrors is the first one that leaps to mind. That feels like a comic book. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I noticed that virtually all of the comics that have been adapted to the stage, they were adapted as musicals, and maybe that's because a musical has that kind of comics feeling of the energy that you mentioned.
Yeah, that heightened sense of reality that comics often have. Even if they're quote unquote ordinary people and not superheroes, there is still that element of energy and just a different reality. It's not reality, and so the music helps maintain that. One of my favorite musicals is 1776, and I don't think that's necessarily comics related, but I do know that people always said, "Oh, that could work as a play. You wouldn't even need the songs," and I totally disagree. I mean, I think it's one of those musicals where the music makes it not preachy. The music humanizes our founding fathers in a way because they have to sing and dance. And often they look like real men singing and dancing. I have seen some productions where they look like Broadway chorus boys singing and dancing, and that's not terribly convincing to me, I have to say. But yeah, there's something about the music that heightens and gives it a different level of reality.
So if you were going to adapt any comic for the stage, what would it be, and how would you stage it?
Well, that's interesting. Because you asked me that question, and I've been thinking about it. I mean, one of the things that we do in the Reduced Shakespeare Company is deconstruct not only the subject matter of our various shows, be it literature or history, generally, but it's we try to find those hidden connections between apparently disparate things. So, when we're playing the various heroes from Shakespeare, Hamlet or Macbeth or King Lear, we juxtapose them into situations where you wouldn't expect them. So we do all of Shakespeare's history plays as an American football game, and King Lear stumbles onto the field and is called for the foul of fictional character on the field. And that sort of absurd juxtaposition always strikes me as interestingly drawn from comics. But in our show, All the Great Books Abridged, we tackled all the books you should have read in high school and probably didn't, focusing primarily on the top 10 that everybody seemed to agree are the greatest pieces of literature ever written in the history of literature, of Don Quixote.
Or so we've heard that they're the greatest.
Exactly. Yes, the common assumption is that they're the greatest. But like Don Quixote and much of Charles Dickens, Moby Dick, War and Peace, the Iliad and the Odyssey. Now, in the Iliad and the Odyssey, my character translates the Iliad and the Odyssey from the original Greek. And turns it into rhyming, creates an adaptation that's written in a rhyming iambic septameter, and I call it the Idiodity, telling both stories. But one of the parallels that we draw is that the hero Odysseus from the Odyssey comes out. When he comes out as the hero, he's dressed in a blue T-shirt, a blue T-shirt with a red cape sticking out the back. And the logo on his chest is the Greek letter O for Odysseus, but it looks like the Omega sign, but it's in the Superman sort of crest shape. And we're trying and consciously or unconsciously, well, I guess consciously because we consciously did it. I mean, we're trying to draw the parallel without stating it. The hero of Odysseus, came down the line and has come down to us in the hero of Superman. The myth of the Superman, and even as that hero translates, at a certain point he starts when they give him all the drugs and he starts to hallucinate that he's William Shatner and Captain Kirk, and so the hero just keeps going. But that's sort of how comics are infiltrate the show, but also actually in completely Hollywood Abridged. We're trying to make our own great Hollywood blockbuster in the Hollywood show, and so we have we wanted to appeal to all four quadrants, and the four quadrants are young and old, male and female. So we want to get a superhero, but give it kind of an ethnic indie sensibility, but we wanted to appeal to old people as well. So we have a scene with superheroes in an old person's home. and it's the Flash comes running out using a walker and it takes him 30 seconds to get to the center of the stage. And they talk in old Jewish accents, and then Bruce Banner comes out as the Hulk, and he's just this old, played by our guy Dominic Conti. He's just this very, very, very skinny old dude who gets angry. Oh, you wouldn't like it when I get angry. I don't want, please, are the Supermans coming over? Yes, the Supermans and the Spidermans, they're coming over for dinner. I don't like that. Oh, Pshaw, don't get me angry. Then when he gets angry, his hands go behind the drop, and he comes out with just those big Hulk hands. That's the only part of his body that changes. And he says, I don't get as angry as I used to. No, I'm sorry. But that's another example of how comics are in the RSC shows. But if I had to adapt a comic in the theater now, I think I would have to kind of go the kind of the musical theater route and find something that kind of lent itself to that sort of heightened reality where both humor and terror and romance and all of these different sort of conflicting emotions and ideas can sort of happen on the same time. And music can bridge so many of those things, the right music. So I was thinking, I was actually thinking The Swamp Thing might be a real good subject matter. And then it also occurred to me, and the movie's coming out, and I can't wait to see how they do it, The Spirit. Will Eisner's The Spirit might lend itself really well to musical theater. I mean, I love all of Will Eisner's stuff because, again, for me, there is the drama of his art, which is so wonderful and so of its time, so rich and noir.
Rather innovative too, and how he'll work like the title of the story into the picture.
Yeah, exactly. And innovative in the sense of the tone. Because, often, people died in his stories, and people got upset when people died. And, and yet people also moved on and there were very strong clowning aspects. I mean, some of his sidekicks looked like literally clowns, like circus clowns. And so that's another thing where you walk this tonal line. I mean, I said my favorite movie is Shaun of the Dead. I mean, that's a movie I think that does successfully walk that tonal line, and that would certainly be my goal in any sort of theatrical adaptation of a comic book.
I'm just a little surprised that maybe The Spirit hasn't already been done. I don't know for the stage.
I don't know. I mean, you'd have to find the right composer who could. Well, you'd have to find the right team. Everybody down the line.
Sure.
But yeah, because you've also got a great, strong central character. In the Spirit, and strong women characters. They were really great female characters. I mean, it could have a City of Angels. A City of Angels meets Phantom of the Opera, but with with some Little Shop of Horror fun and energy into it. Let's get that thing going right now. Let's do that one.
Yeah, so I watched your whole Shakespeare Complete Works on YouTube, and there's a big part of that in Hamlet where you've got audience participation thing, bringing some people on stage and involving pretty much everybody. And I thought, that's happened in comics sometimes too. Like I read a Spider-Man issue once where they pulled me into the story and made me play Doc Ock.
Oh yeah, interesting. Well, yeah, that's it. Just pulls you in, and it's the mark of a classic. That doesn't happen to you every time, but sometimes it does.
Yeah.
How do you think comics have kind of percolated up into our culture? I mean, are they just? I mean, they're clearly not for kids. And the last time I went into a comic book shop, I hadn't gone into a comic book shop for like 10 or 15 years, and I went into one, and my world was turned upside down. It was no longer, well, first of all, it was no longer 25 cents.
Yeah.
But also, there was no standard. There are so many different kinds of comics for every appetite and every price range and every taste. I mean, in a certain way, it's expanded, and that's fantastic. But on another level, it's like, where does the kid today sort of just jump in?
Yeah, well, I mean, there are a lot of different kinds of comics, but I don't know that there are very many for kids anymore. I mean, that's what a lot of people in the industry sort of wring their hands about. And Marvel will try it occasionally, and they don't really get the audience. I don't know if it's just kids aren't paying attention to comics anymore, except for the Japanese ones. I think the younger generation, my sense from over here in Japan, but the younger generation in the States, I think, is particularly interested in manga, and especially girls, I think. Well, depending, in Japan, they're really comics for everybody. And in the States, the female market hasn't really been served very well up till very recently.
Right.
But these Japanese comics go over to the States, and they're reaching that the female audience that American comics have been hard pressed to try to figure out how to appeal to.
Right. Well, and I remember when I was a kid, the only manga I knew was Speed Racer, and that doesn't really count.
Yeah, I certainly didn't know very many Japanese comics until like 10, 15. Well, when in the 80s, I remember Lone Wolf and Cub came out in translation in the States, and that was kind of a big deal at that time because nobody knew Japanese comics.
That's interesting. Oh, well, and I mean, I know that comic book movies are dominating everything. Everybody's got to make the trek down to Comic-Con in San Diego now. All actors and directors, blah blah blah. Everybody, but and so I guess comics have really infiltrated. I guess, but it doesn't seem like a percolating up. It seems like from the top down. We now get the big Batman movies. We get the Iron Man movie. We get the Superman movie, although the last one didn't do very well and wasn't very good. We got Smallville. We watched, my family and I, we watched the first 4 or 5 seasons of Smallville until we couldn't stand Lana Lang anymore.
Well, I to some extent, I wonder if those stories are sort of the same as your all the great books abridged. It's, the comics for people who don't really know anything about them.
Well, that might be.
I know Superman, but I never read him. That kind of thing. They know kind of the basic idea, and it kind of builds on that. Except nowadays, from what I hear, they're also appealing more to the people who do know them, where in the past they just kind of ignored the audience that actually reads the comics.
Right.
But now the comics audiences are actually happy with some of the things that are coming out, like Dark Knight or.
Yeah, they're trying not to alienate the diehard fans who could do some damage in the. They could spread the bad word, and I think that's good. I mean, a mark of respect. You want everybody to like it, but you really, really want the smart people to like it, the people who are really invested. I mean, that's what we do with our Reduced Shakespeare Company shows. Is when we're not getting it wrong on purpose for comic effect, we try very hard to get our facts right, and which is it's gratifying because then we get professors of English and professors of Shakespeare and history coming to the show, and even ministers from all denominations, 5s, 10s, and 20s, coming to the Bible show and sending their flocks and their classes because they know that we know what we're talking about.
But now, also, of course, recently, besides the superhero comics and superhero comics movies, some other more kind of, you could say, art comics, graphic novels have been getting adapted as movies too. Ghost World and the first one that comes to mind.
300. 28 Days of Night. Is that what it was? 20 something.
And Persepolis. Marjane Satrapi put out herself the animated version of Persepolis, which I still want to see.
Yeah, I didn't say. Oh, Persepolis. Oh, the Iranian movie.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh well, and the Triplets of Belleville. I don't know whether that was drawn from a comic book, but it certainly had a really cool comic book style.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, in that way, I think comics are becoming somewhat more, a little bit more mainstream. I mean, at least in America, people are starting to get that comics aren't just for kids, and maybe aren't even for kids at all anymore.
Right. You're right. No, you're right. And they're also no longer poo-pooed, as something that's going to kill your brain. I mean, I think enough of us have grown up on them now. I just read David Haydew's book, which I can't remember the title of. Oh shoot. It's the one about the comics hysteria in the 40s and 50s.
The Wortham thing, seduction of the innocent, and that. Yeah, I think we're finally kind of getting past that. Marvel has stopped observing the comics code, and but comics are finally kind of growing up, where they had this kind of stunted development for decades because there was so much that they couldn't do. Well, movies and TV were ripping past them and growing up, and comics were frozen. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's like they are coming into sort of their heyday. It's not hard to find a comic book store in America anymore, and you don't have to go to the crappy part of town to find it.
So, and of course, the newspaper comics, as I said, are kind of really the mainstream comics, because everybody knows those if they read a newspaper or read them online even. So those are always there. Except the thing about the newspaper comics is that they don't turn over enough. It's kind of the same things for decades. They just never kind of end and let the new people move in.
Right. Well, yeah, the characters, the Peanuts kids remain children, Mary Worth always remained, 65. All these serialized things. I have to say, I don't really I used to pay attention to the Boondocks. I used to pay attention to Bloom County. I loved the Calvin and Hobbes. And the Far Side, but the contemporary ones, except for Doonesbury, I really am not paying much attention to them, I have to say.
Okay.
All right. Well, this is great. This is a great conversation. I'm really enjoyed this.
Yes. Well, thank you very much for agreeing to come on. It's been great on this end too. I'm planning on putting this up on December 22nd, but I'll drop you an email anyway.
Well then, happy holidays.
Austin Tichenor is appearing with the Reduced Shakespeare Company in Miami through December 28th, performing in The Complete Works of William Shakespeare Abridged. And you can get RSC performance info and find their podcast at reducedshakespeare.com. Keep an eye on that podcast because Austin was also recording our conversation to possibly use in a future RSC podcast. But he'll likely leave in some of what I cut out, and vice versa. By the way, Austin, thanks for letting me throw in a couple of clips from Complete Works. As always, everybody, we'd like your feedback. Let us know if you have some comics-related topic you'd like to hear discussed on this podcast, or someone you'd like me to interview. Write to mail@deconstructingcomics.com, or post on our blog at deconstructingcomics.com. In addition to emailing and posting on the blog, we'd especially appreciate our listeners posting reviews of this podcast on iTunes. There's also a Deconstructing Comics page on Facebook. And if you think our interviews, reviews, and general comics-related discussion is worth some cold hard cash to you, feel free to send us some. Web hosting ain't free, and I've had it with door-to-door chocolate bar sales. Use the PayPal link at deconstructingcomics.com. Deconstructing Comics is brought to you by comicsnow.com. If you're liking the comical books, you can subscribe to all your favorite series from Comics Now and get 35% off the cover price and off of any other books you order. Comics Now provides many of the comics we review on this show. Read Eric's newsletter on our site, deconstructingcomics.com, to see this month's pick, which will be 50% off to Comics Now subscribers. Next week, Kumar will be Skyping in from the land down under, and we'll both duck. Howard the Duck, that is. We'll be reviewing the Essential Howard the Duck Volume 1, collecting all of Steve Gerber's Howard stories from the 70s. Till then, thanks for listening. This is Tim. See you next week on Deconstructing Comics.